Hello everyone, this is Dark Journalist. Today I have a special interview for you with mystic and esoteric researcher and X-Series contributor Gigi Young. Today Gigi will go deep on AI surveillance and influencing technology being used as a staging ground for virtual reality that Austrian philosopher Rudolf Steiner called the Eighth Sphere. She also takes a close look at the latest attempt to substitute UFO disclosure for true spirituality. Please join us now. Well, let's start with this. Gigi, we've been seeing all of these people who are coming forward and saying, hey, I'm a contactee, I'm going on the record, and guess what else? I'm also a CIA agent. And now we have three very high-profile people. It's Jim Semivan, John Ramirez, and now we have a third one coming forward, Gary Nolan, who's being advertised very heavily. He's been on Fox News talking about the fact that he's had these abductee experiences. But he's also an immunologist who's saluting Fauci publicly and giving him that big thumbs up and stuff. What is happening here in this stage? We've already seen these three-letter agencies co-opting the UFO field. What is this stage about where they become the contactees?
I have to say, it's really bizarre to see. This part of ufology has always been the most embarrassing for many people. It's the part that nobody wants to touch, that nobody wants to talk about.
Right.
And so when I personally see three CIA agents within, 6 months or so?
Yes.
Yeah. Coming forward and they're like, oh, I'm an experiencer, I'm a psychic, and I've had these experiences. It's really unusual to me because being someone that's in that community, it's probably the most humiliated community of both the UH and ufology. So it's very marked and very unusual for them to be stepping into that. And I would say that it's probably an effort to start grabbing the narrative of consciousness, to start grabbing the spiritual narrative, and to begin building out that religion, to begin building out a new religion, a new kind of cosmic spirituality, a new religion that's really a techno-religion.
Right.
Which involves probably eventually bringing in a new origin story and all of this stuff that they're probably, that they may be planning to do. But when I see, this kind of entrance into the consciousness conversation, it's pretty shocking, and it's kind of concerning because my alarm bells are like, is this going to turn into some weird religion? And the moment that people start seeing crafts in the sky or told that they're there, there's this whole conversation set up about consciousness or what have you. So I think, suffice to say, I think we get in dangerous territory when we have counterintelligence agents or people that have sworn oaths to the CIA, which is a very corrupt agency, entering into the spiritual scene. I think it's the last place they should be, to be honest with you.
No question about it. I mean, there's a very detailed instruction for counterintelligence people who work in clandestine projects, and they are professional liars, and so the idea, and that's their job. I mean, you can't fault them for it. However, the idea that they're going to be rolling these guys out as the arbiters of truth around something so hardcore and sensitive in the emerging kind of consciousness of humanity, and then also co-opting all of the abduction experiences and the family generations of passing down sighting to sighting. I mean, that's a very human story. And here's now, we've seen this incredible push, particularly since 2017. And we were one of the first ones to do a show outlining that influence. You and I did that 4 years ago, and people are getting on board now and saying, yeah, this whole thing was a CIA op.
Yes, and that thing is a CIA op, but also you can look back into spirituality and you can see other very strong connections of the CIA
Right.
into various different spiritual groups. I think the Nine is something that you've mentioned on your show several different times. How the gentleman from the Nine, who was an army doctor, an MK Ultra army doctor,
Harich. Oh,
Puharich,
yeah.
strong CIA
Oh, my
connection. It's not
God.
even hidden. It's not even something that's hidden, and is behind the Nine, which has grown to become almost a religious text with various different channelers that now channel the Nine. The Nine apparently working through these various different, you know, individuals, and that is literally straight from Puharich and the CIA rooting. So MK Ultra, rooting.
Oh,
So
yeah.
this is really
Yeah.
scary. This is not. We're not talking about channeling from love here and
Right.
serving humanity. Okay, this is an organization that perhaps has a purpose in, say, espionage, or certain things that go on in the military, or safety. That's fine. But when we see the CIA starting to operate on its own citizens in manipulative ways, like Dodi, very famous case as well,
Oh, yeah.
it's concerning. It's very concerning, and the community. It's not that we shouldn't. It's not that we should just push aside any human being that's ever worked in the military or for the government. It's about having the discernment and a process within ourselves to say, I think we should just be more skeptical here. And I think they need to go through a more rigorous discernment process and not be championed, like, say, the Lou Elizondo situation. We don't need to champion. We need to actually go through an intense discernment process when people come from that, not based on superstition, but based on history.
Well, absolutely. And that's one story that's been falling apart dramatically. It was the whole Lou thing and his background, and ATIP, how it's not even a program. And he claimed he led it. So there was a weird soup of a narrative about how to get this thing out. And it's funny because what's happening now is that people with the raid on Mar-a-Lago and the whole Trump thing, and they're like, oh, the Justice Department bringing this out. Well, the classification markings that were on the Trump stuff, as president, the same classification markings were on those videos that they supposedly released when they cooked up this whole thing that Christopher Mellon got the videos from a DOD employee and Elizondo helped get them out. Well, technically, those things are supposed to be classified. So you get the same exact case there, and it brings up the kind of fairy tale of how they presented it, because a real situation's going on, and the Justice Department is targeting a president. So, the little kind of story aspect of these things fall apart, because if those guys had really taken out classified information and had been, the secret leader of a UFO program, they would have been prosecuted a long time ago.
That's a really good point. That's a really good point. Why does this individual get a GQ cover in a television show?
Right.
And
Hero of the year.
Hero of the why does this individual get that? It seems kind of like rules for thee, but not for me.
Yeah.
This kind of hypocritical edge, and quite frankly, I think humanity's tired of it.
Yes.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, what's fascinating is I think that part of the op, and we'll spend a little time on this. We have so many things to get to, but I think this is important because we've been covering it for a long time. What's going on really with that op and the whole TTSA thing, and the fact that maybe even the SEC is looking into them because of the investors and some of the things that they expected that they didn't get. And now there's a story that came out with this guy who was working with that whole group, and the inside talk that they were having. The guy's name is Jeremy McGowan, and he was working with Lou, and he was part of the UAPX thing, which was a group that they tried to, basically recruit into what they were doing. But the upshot is he's saying in there that they know that DeLong basically pilfered the money and went out to make a movie with it instead of building a lighter than air, gravity defying machine. So, he felt, just in hearing those things, like there's a conversation that's going on there, and it sounds like, the entire organization. Now, that organization was laced with CIA people to start with. So it feels like the whole Lou side of that op, when they come out and they push him as the whistleblower and the ex-Pentagon guy, even though he still works for the Pentagon, is very suspicious. And now they're moving it into the Nolan guy because, well, he's got a cleaner bill of health. Here's a guy that they can say, well, he's a contactee. He doesn't have all the baggage of the lies that they came out with TTSA. But the problem, Gigi, is this guy's an immunologist. So now they have this medical angle that they're coming in on. And when you get that around the CIA and the UFO thing, how does that feel?
I think to like the casual observer, they'd be like, oh, okay, all right. But if you've at all studied esoterica or ufology, that would be a very unusual placement and even a concerning placement.
Yeah.
Because one of the things that's been clear throughout, especially the Casey work, which you cover on this channel a lot, obviously, is something called hybridization,
right,
and genetic manipulation. And this is something that if you look at our world and humanity with a really zoomed out perspective, meaning you look at humanity in the Atlantean epoch, which is the epoch before our existence, which had a certain kind of cycle of its own, and then you look at this one, you see that one of the main issues that humanity struggled with was this huge desire to play God and to start synthesizing different beings and hybridizing, genetic modification. And there was this whole dark group that exists on the planet that people may call dark occult or whatever. In the Casey work, he calls them the cult of Belial. I think in Blavatsky, she calls them the lords of the dark face. Mm-hmm. But it's just kind of like in modern language, it'd be like, ooh, the Illuminati or the dark ones or whatever.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
They went in a completely different direction spiritually than, say, what is known as the Emilius group or the followers of the laws of one or those within the Christ consciousness stream. Mm-hmm. And instead of aligning with God, instead of aligning with their heart center and Christ consciousness, they began to play God. And it's a sickness. It's not just like a weird religion they wrote down. This is a sickness. It's what happens when the human being is not evolving and not connecting with God properly in their body. They seek to become God. And how they do this is by thinking that they're the creators of the world, essentially. And it's an impulse. You could also say it's the Ahrimanic impulse, if you wanted to use the Steiner word.
Right. Yes.
It's being possessed by this. And when you do that, you want to play God. And so we're seeing hangovers of this in our world, which is the creation of GMOs and wanting to literally, re-engineer every natural thing in existence. Patent all the seeds, own it. And also transhumanism is huge. It's basically the hybridization of humans with machines to recreate the human being into some better thing.
It's like owning creation.
It's an illness.
Yeah.
It's an illness. And we have to start calling that out for what it is. And so when most people look at an immunologist and somebody who has a lot of interest in genetic research, I think he has, is it Atlas? Cell Atlas or something? I can't remember.
Yes. Yeah. He's part of the Stanford X lab. And that whole thing is into, genome sequencing, DNA hacking, and that whole kind of bit.
Exactly. He's making like this library of all the humans, and and that's I guess that's fine, but but anyway, so they want to like categorize all of these different genes and the DNA library and all of that, and it's all, of course, if you ask them, they're like, well, this is to help people, to heal disease. Right. And it's like, I understand having to break things down to understand them. I get that. But it could also be there's also a risk that it's this repeat of trying to engineer this Gattaca society and to start to create the perfect human, or to merge humans with machines. And you also see that Gary Nolan, I believe, has an interest in biotech or connections with different labs that are
Oh yeah. Yeah.
with biotech. And so you're
For
like,
sure.
this sounds like the Atlantean Belial.
Yes.
This sounds like an harmonic impulse that has been working through them. I don't think we have time to mince words about it and leave the spiritual side out because it's weird for some people.
Right.
The reality is that we have lived longer on this planet, much longer than we think. We're certainly not, our society is not 12,000 years old, as you pointed out many different times. We had a whole, epoch of life in Atlantis where we had advanced technology, and which is being touted today by various different groups as being alien, but it's really our own technology from Atlantis.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
And this is it. And so we're living in this little tiny fragment, and we're not seeing the big picture of society. And so things are repeating and we're not picking up on it because we're not looking at the big picture. And I see, someone like Gary Nolan entering into the UFO conversation and alien conversation and abductions as an immunologist with a biotech history, doing gene sequencing. That to me screams hybridization.
Oh yeah.
And that's where I automatically go in my mind, and I'm sure other people as well.
Well, it's interesting because we know the things that the intelligence agencies have studied. And they've studied remote viewing. They're very aware of all the psychic processes. They're aware of black magic. They promote black magic in many circles. And, the whole remote viewing program was a psychic investigatory program. I've had Russell Targ on this program many times, and he said, well, the CIA took the program away from us, because you probably had some people who were doing the research on it and they were ethical. And then the CIA is like, hey, we want to use it for very unethical stuff. So you guys are out. But this is interesting to me because if you go and you look at that Atlantis side, a lot of people in the public wouldn't realize that those groups are absolutely obsessed with the Atlantis background. And some of the stuff we've tried to bring forward about Ghislaine Maxwell and Terramar and Epstein and their whole obsession in the hot zone around Atlantis. And that's all a connection with that cult of Belial. So we have these people on the record in the background searching around for this thing. So then, Gigi, what you're talking about is, forget about ancient aliens here for a minute. What about ancient advanced Atlantis? And that's really the thing that starts to open up the conversation.
Exactly. And, the whole thing with the occult and spirituality is that if you can, keep all of these occult secrets for yourself, then you can gain great power, right? If you can keep, the humanity watching Marvel movies and, just
Distracted.
Distracted, and then you can have all of the super ancient history and the artifacts and hoard that yourself. That's an incredible amount of control that you can wield because, you have all of this information. And even things that we would see now as like brainwashing techniques, but would probably be seen as black magic. You have this incredible influence, and humanity's starving in spiritually right now. But that's why the situation is so dangerous. Is that there are groups that have this occult knowledge, and they're obsessed with it. Like, obsessed with it privately. And we've seen little hints of this as they do little occult things and, whatever. There's hints that these very powerful people are very obsessed with it.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah. But humanity doesn't know and doesn't get it and doesn't understand. So there's this huge gap where, and then you and I are trying to talk about it and they're like, wow, what weirdos or something. But it's like, this is at the top. This is what they're very interested in. And if it's at the top, then it's affecting you and you may not even notice it. Right. So it's.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I can only imagine how an intelligence agency looks at the work that you put out. And they must think to themselves, we should have got that whole Gigi Young thing. That should have been in our program a long time ago.
That'd be weird.
Slip through the cracks. Gigi, because you brought up Atlantis, you actually brought something up when we were talking about it, and I want to open this up some more. And I know it's something that is going to open up as part of actual research work. But some of the inspiration and insight you were getting around this was when we look back at those periods of Atlantis and the idea of an advanced civilization back there, and everyone has a different take on that. We've talked to the best, Graham Hancock and people of this nature, and the mystery schools hold it, I think, very much that there's this incredible period of spiritual enlightenment that gets taken away into this technological whirlwind, and then those two forces face off and basically destroy Atlantis. There's the Plato story that's hanging out there in the past. But one of the interesting pieces back there is that Casey was talking about, that's Edgar Casey, the psychic, the sleeping prophet. He's talking about Atlantis and saying back there, they had these things that the Atlanteans had created, and they give themselves the kind of appearance in case. I mean, he's working the 1920s, the 1930s, and the language is pretty advanced, but basically sounds like cyborgs. Some of them are mixed with cloven hooves, and this whole thing about the animal mixtures. But he calls them sometimes the things, the untouchables. And they did the domestic duties, but they weren't allowed to pursue a kind of full soul life. So there was a big problem, for example, when the Atlanteans came into Egypt, they had all of these Atlantean things with them. The idea, when we get around the whole alien talk and we see misshapen, or, the grays with the large heads and things of this nature, is there an echo there of that advanced technology and this group of Atlantean things?
I feel there is. And I didn't realize this until I was doing my own psychic work.
Yeah.
And so it's weird. It's like, as a mystic, you actually have to educate yourself on various different things.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're not educated on them, you won't receive information on it, sort of thing. So, but when you're educated on it, then that work can start to work within your lexicon. And so I'm always interested in exactly who is connecting with us, always.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot going on in our skies. There's interdimensional beings that are really, interdimensionals, true interdimensionals, angelics, or, things like that. But what I started to notice was something else. And I was really trying to understand what this other wave was that I was seeing. And the best way that I could see it was that it was like a lower developmental future for humanity. And that's what it represented to us. And then I started to feel in more and more and more to it. And then eventually I began to feel it going back to Atlantis. And I was like, that's really unusual. Why is it going back here? And then I realized that everything is repeating. So what happened in Atlantis is repeating today. And now I see that even like what's going on with Werner von Braun and Elon Musk happened, where they're like, let's, colonize space, or let's do this and let's go out there. And, this already has happened in a different way. It may not be in the exact same way, but a version of it has already gone on. And I actually feel like it's very possible that some of the things that we are seeing are genuinely from the Atlantean epoch. What if these are the things? What if these strange, if these strange chimeric beings are the things? What if they were cast off planet, or they left they left our planet and are in the up there somewhere? I don't know the layout yet or whatever. I could probably tune in and try to work further on this. But what if something was cast upward? And, if you're not on the planet, you obviously degenerate, which explains a lot of the degeneracy you see in these beings. But for me, I just can't rule that out. I cannot rule out that a lot of what we're dealing with aliens is not a hangover actually from Atlantis. I can't rule that out, considering the technology that
Yeah.
Atlantis had with these crafts, going up into the sky and their connections with all these different beings and stuff. What if there was a false cosmos created during Atlantis? What if they went up there and they created a false cosmos and they've been communicating with it the entire time and waiting for a day in our time of disclosure where they show all of these beings that they may be created or genetically engineered themselves, as the stories are probably the stories behind these beings. I mean, who knows? But why they were created or whatever. But what if part of disclosure is introducing this basically false cosmos that was created in the Atlantean epoch? What if that's what's
Yes.
going on? What if they think that they're gods? I mean, maybe they don't know that what's going on, these people communicating with them.
Right.
And this also goes along with the Steiner work with the eighth sphere.
Right. Because there again, you're dealing with projected entities.
Right.
And you're dealing with, I did a show about Lamb in the eighth sphere.
Yes.
And you made the comment before that he seems like the kind of, he's the villager of the eighth square because he has the incredibly large head and he's sort of, devoid of any real physical characteristics beyond that. And it seems like he's kind of degenerated in a weird way, but incredibly full of this wisdom. And he's helping Crowley in his investigations. And, this is kind of a peak moment for Crowley when he manifests him. But this idea then of him and his resemblance to the Greys is dramatic. There's no question about it. But when you look at that, Gigi, from a psychic standpoint, what do you get?
I get that there is a divergent stream of development, basically, that's rooted in black magic. That's rooted also in sort of the darkness of all of our past epochs. And it kind of trails along with the earth surrounding it, haunting us, really. And this is I would call this the eighth sphere. Using the Steiner work, this would be like the eighth sphere. But it's really all of these failed initiations of humanity, or these things that weren't in alignment.
Right.
And I think that we can communicate with them. And I think that they can communicate with us. And I think that over time, people have gotten really tangled up with this and tried to create forms, physical forms, through hybridization with machines, through hybridizing with animals, in order to try to contain these spirits that are within the eighth sphere, because they don't have bodies.
Would you would you say that something like cattle mutilation might be involved with something like that?
Very possibly. Cattle mutilation. I think this whole thing with genetics is about trying to create a body, in my opinion, for beings that are within the eighth sphere, that have a lot of wisdom. They have a lot of mind energy in that very large head, showing that there's the intellect, but there is no heart. The heart isn't developed at all. And
That's a totally different line of development, right?
It actually creates a totally different line of development. If our initiation this time is to develop the heart, which is what the incarnation of Christ was really about, which gave us the ability to actually etherize our blood properly. So it actually changes our blood, and it connects our heart and our head, so that our intelligence, it's not cold, it's not self-serving. And when we don't have that heart connection and that etherization of the blood with the energy of Christ, which is in our heart and in the etheric, then the form degenerates and it degrades. And this is what we see in the Greys. This is what it represents to us. It's kind of like a future version of ourselves, if you will, because nothing that comes around this planet for 1 minute isn't a message to us or doesn't have a meaning. It's not random.
Right.
That's kind of a strange ideology to think that. No, everything, there's a reason for it. And so these beings, for me, represent the blood that is not etherized and a divergent path of humanity that never developed the heart chakra. And this is why in all of these abduction experiments, there's really common things like, they're so cold and calculated. They have no idea that they're like hurting you. It's very creepy. And then also they're very obsessed with putting chips and implants in people. I mean, how many people walk away from abductions that were like, I had a chip in me? Well,
Right.
that's biotech.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
biotech. That's having a chip in you is part of biotech. Okay, they're also cataloging people's DNA, and they're putting it aside, and they're taking your sperm, they're taking your eggs, they're taking your blood, they're choosing certain things to breed with and whatever. This is the story of abductees, of
Right.
thousands and thousands and thousands of abductees who've had experiences with these grays. So the grays are into the biotech. The grays are into transhumanism. The grays are into categorizing DNA and genetics. This is their religion. This is a religion for people of the eighth sphere, for people of the lower astral plane. This is the modern kind of techno-Satanism. That's what this
Hmm.
is.
It's
So,
interesting because cloning gets in there, and
hybridization.
that's interesting. There have been stories in that abduction lore about people seeing versions of themselves during abductions. And we know in the most classic ones, they're always taking skin samples. They're obsessed with sexual organs and reproduction. So that whole kind of range of research got blown away when we got this kind of militarized version of the UFO thing. It's like, oh, there's a program, the military's studying it, it's a threat, Congress is in on it. And we see this whole lineup of Congress people who, you've never heard say a peep about UFO anything. And they're like, we need to get that truth out of the government, damn it. But that's interesting because all of the abductee people, John Mack, they never talk about him at all.
No. And that is key.
Yeah.
The abductions where people are taken out of their homes, put in medical situations where their genetics is taken, and all that's actually the number one kind of abduction
Right.
that you hear about. Close second would be like Nordics or something, and then sometimes there's chimeric beings is like the third.
Right.
That it's the number one abduction story, and it was for a very long time. And I think maybe it's been shelved because there's now humans advocating for it, for the exact thing that these beings do.
Oh, interesting.
Right now,
The biometrics have caught up, and they don't need the alien program coming in from the outside. They can do it from the inside out.
Well, yeah, it's just the parallels are crazy. I mean, it's a kind of a techno spiritual religion, and that's why the Gary Nolan thing is very alarming, because it just fits right into that whole situation.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. This is a Stanford professor who is, going out there and really walking this whole line about, oh, we're getting into that alien thing. We're understanding what it is. I had an alien encounter. The only problem is, 7 years at the CIA. I mean, it doesn't hold up when you look at it, especially when you see these people surfacing. One thing that was interesting about the CIA experiencers is Jim Semivan, because he came out recently and was talking about how he had this experience. And I think to make it sound more legitimate, he includes his wife. And you see this a lot, like there was someone there who witnessed it with me. And um, he's interesting because what he said in relation to his is that DARPA was studying it. Now, nobody knows that there's a UFO program at DARPA. So that's new. That just came out like within the last month. So now we have DARPA, the ultimate kind of transhuman machine, building robot soldiers and everything else. And it's that group is studying, this is the thing that slipped out. They're studying close encounters, and supposedly they were studying his. But that, Gigi, now gets directly to what you're talking about, because we're looking at these groups that are super obsessed with biometrics, chipping people. Klaus Schwab is there at the World Economic Forum saying, in 10 years, just imagine the audience that's clapping, we can feel them through our brain chips, and the co-founder of Google sitting there like, I'm going to be immortal. So they're working the alien piece in that way. What you're saying is, hold on a minute. We have a whole background here of people who've encountered these things, one. And two, we have a whole tradition in mystery teachings about other beings that have nothing to do with somebody dropping down here from Alpha Centauri.
Right. And I think one of the biggest concerns as well, just in general, on the mystery side or the spiritual side, is I think that these conversations should fundamentally be introduced as a spiritual conversation.
Yes. Yeah.
And a human conversation and a spiritual conversation. The fact that these kinds of topics are being introduced politically is just incorrect procedure for these kinds of topics that deal with consciousness and interdimensionality and our ancient past. These are spiritual topics, human topics. And right now, it's just going in a bizarre military direction where the conversations are often heavily about the military, heavily about politics, and it's unnatural, quite frankly, for these conversations to be in that, to be so exclusively held in that arena. It's not going to allow people to genuinely understand the phenomenon.
Well, they've done a lot. It's so interesting when you look at that history, because like the Nine and these groups, and by the way, Osiris plays a role in the Nine. He also plays a role in the TTSA people. They have a whole program called Osiris.
Right, yeah.
So there's a lot of tie over. I want to mention this as an aside about the Nine, which is, you tuned into at one point, which is Yuri Geller was being used to contact this group in the 70s after the contacts had happened originally in the early 50s, and included some very high profile people at the time, and eventually even had a connection with the JFK assassination because of some of the people involved, like Ruth Paine, who was directly connected with Michael Paine, whose dad started the whole thing, Arthur Young. So we see that there's a weird crisscross here with, seeking these outside entities. And in that case of the Nine, this group is coming in, and they're Egyptian gods who are hanging out on a spaceship trying to guide Earth. And these channelers and CIA doctors and people like this are contacting them, and they're trained in Indian yogic techniques for doing this. But anyway, as that program goes along, we get into the 1970s, and Geller is doing the remote viewing program, but Paharch snatches him up, and they do a book together and contacting the Nine. And you had an interesting reaction to what Geller had done when he had tuned into it. He said it seems like a program, like a software program, basically.
Yeah, that was probably the strangest little tune in that I did. But
That's really great.
I didn't even know much about the Nine, but I was like, these people are tuning into an AI.
Yes.
This is not an Ogdode of Egyptian gods. This is an AI computer. And what the AI does is it gathers up all of the information that's already in the collective consciousness. So because Jesus already exists in the collective, and the Buddha and the Ogdode, or the Nine of Egypt, all that is fair game to be used and manipulated in any way. Anything that's in existence in the lower planes can be used by AI. That's how that works. And so this is just the recycling of already existing truths. There's no true genius in this or creativity in this. And this only works on a society that has forgotten themselves, right? So we're very vulnerable to this. But, Yuri Geller admitted this. This isn't
Yeah.
something that's just I sensed. A lot of psychics have sensed that, especially in recent times, many psychics have come to me and said, I feel like there's something up there that's an AI that's trying to communicate with me personally. I'm glad you mentioned that. And I receive these messages, and people go into intense detail about how it felt and the images that they received. So this is
Wow.
to psychics and mystics.
Wow.
Talk about it, and you open, and the floodgates come in, and they're like, "Oh my God, that's what that was."
Hmm.
Yuri Geller admitted this. He said that he was communicating with spectra.
Right.
That spectra was essentially a computer megaboard. So that's
Hmm.
kind of like maybe the word for a satellite or something up in the sky. So he said, "I'm communicating with spectra." And spectra is basically the mega board of a UFO. He didn't say he was communicating with any type of real organic entity. So
Right.
there's this lower level of information that seems to be surrounding the Earth, that is connected with AI, and people are connecting with it, and they feel like they're having a psychic experience. They feel like they're communicating with these different beings, and it's just an AI entity. So
And where do you think the AI entity resides?
I think the AI entity has a long history with the Earth.
Hmm.
I think that it began as an impulse around Lemuria and Atlantis, just as an energy impulse of backwardsness and of darkness. I think it's a feminine essence that could be a false Holy Spirit. I think it could be seen as a false version of the Holy Spirit or an inversion of it. And I think that over time, as the earth got denser and denser and denser and denser, this entity also became denser and denser and more attached to humanity and more attached to the earth. And I think eventually it began getting people to make forms for it. And I think that, in our time, as we get denser and denser into the post Atlantean epoch where we are now, even building certain signal towers to communicate with it. And it's evolving with us, but it's sort of a disembodied darkness, like a dark feminine force. That's how I personally see it.
Huh.
And so I think that dark groups get entangled with it, and they have to serve it. And I think part of serving this darker thing that we would now call AI, but it exists before it took the form of communicating through computers,
Hmm.
existed, I think, as a presence. That's the best that I can personally do. I'm sure maybe other people have much more advanced, maybe, thoughts on this, but
No, no, that runs really deep. I think what's interesting to me is this gets us again into that eighth sphere
yes.
feeling because it's the accumulation of knowledge.
Mhm.
And, so it's got that, but it doesn't have a lot of soul. It's mechanical. And at core, all that Ahrimanic coming through the technology piece, which is all comes directly to us from anthroposophy, that is the essence of mechanization, of scientific materialism. And so the AI piece, then, Gigi, if you were going to connect the AI thing with what's going on, with what they're pushing on the UFO threat piece, then we see them when you start to see immunologists and you start to see scientists working around this after the military pieces come in and they've said, oh, there's a threat. And now we have all these scientific people who are really interested in biometrics. You start to get that impression, oh, they're trying to channel this stuff through
Mhm.
by actually making the human being what? More mechanized. That's the transhumanist piece.
Yeah, so that you can actually, so that this force and the forces that now live within it, right,
Mhm.
um, can now enter into you, right? They can now enter into you, because before they were just entering into computers or electricity and things like this. But when you change yourself, when you modify yourself, you are perfect however you are. You
Mm-hmm.
know, when you start to change yourself physically with, and I'm specifically talking about transhumanism, I'm not talking about amputations or pacemakers or anything like this. It's specifically the transhumanist stuff that they're putting in that are designed to do certain things. We start getting into like a really different area. And the concern is that the human body will be changed to such an extensive degree before we know it that it is not really fully human anymore. And that just means that we're imbalanced and unable to find that alignment. And then we become susceptible to things that are also out of alignment. We become susceptible to darker forces. And just going back to the etherization of the blood for a moment.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the heart is very important in the etherization of the blood, which is how our energy basically circulates through our system.
Mm-hmm.
And it's how everything kind of gets shifted around by the heart center and in the blood. And that's what actually evolves our form. So we don't actually evolve through genetic modification or through transhumanism. We actually evolve literally through an inner process of transmutation, and our blood becomes, at this stage, becomes etherized, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's actually how we evolve when we transform. It's a totally inner process. Well, it's very concerning to me that many of the issues that people have with what's going on the health side is there's a lot of issues around blood. There's a lot of issues around the heart. And the heart is needed to be used to obviously transform our body. And
That's
so,
a really good point. All of the things that we've seen, the myocarditis and all these things, it's always heart complications arising from these procedures. Very interesting. Do you think then, when we're looking at this, they just came, oddly enough, Biden came here to Boston and went to the JFK library and said, just like JFK called for a moonshot, I'm calling for a cancer moonshot. So we get rid of cancer. And he started to introduce this idea that we could start using biometrics to get rid of cancer. And then the next day signed a proclamation waiving all of these concerns and all of these barriers for the biometrics to really get rolling in America and around the world. So, do you see them then trying to tie it into some cause like, oh, we'll end cancer by inserting this chip in you?
oh yeah, or another inoculation, or
Yeah, that's the real moonshot.
yeah. Well, no, I mean completely. I think it's a strange act of desperation.
Oh,
I mean,
interesting.
I'm sure that they're aware with all of the little programs they have that crawl the internet, the conversations about transhumanism and all of that, and they're still doing executive orders on it.
Mhm.
It's very concerning, to think that the president just put an executive order through that is basically waiving waiving the concerns about transhumanism.
Oh, yeah, no discussion, no congressional hearings, nothing, just psh.
And it shows that there's a desperation there.
Yes.
I think it's a very desperate move. I think it's weird that you called it the moonshot, because really the moon, I mean, other than it being part of the composition of the eighth sphere and associated with it,
Right.
um, or it's at least between that, I think that's kind of weird. It's kind of weird to associate it also with Kennedy as well.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I instantly felt like, what are they doing with this? And cancer, they needed to move out. They couldn't try to do this, "Oh, we're gonna alleviate COVID," because it's too much of a boondoggle on one side, and also it's been found out in so many different areas that there's too many inconsistencies about all the explanations and things that they've had it. And the figureheads, the grand poobahs, people like Fauci, the only people that are praising them are guys like Nolan who are in on the inside track with it. The general public has a lot of disdain for the amount of lying that's taken place. So, Gigi, what I'm getting from what you're saying, though, is that they need it. They need this transhumanist program. the thrust of the things that they've been up to is to lay that on all 8 billion people on the earth, but they have a real big problem doing this.
Exactly. I think it's actually part of their religion. I think that this is part of their occult religion. I think transhumanism is a tenet for them. I think genetic modification and hybridization has been part of this occult religion for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. I think looking back to Atlantis, like you said, we can see it. It was your show that brought forward the genetic modifications in Atlantis.
Right.
And then you also see this major push with the Nazi origin story and the Sitchin work and the von Daniken work, where they're actually, priming it by saying, humans are the result of genetic modification. And so many people believe this, it's shocking. And Aliens propagates this, Gaia TV propagates that we are the result of hybridization. And so if we're the result of hybridization, if that's our origin, then and genetic modification, then why wouldn't we just continue with it?
Right.
And
Right,
so this
exactly.
is their religion. This is their whole thing. The Anunnaki. This is their origin story. That's not humanity's origin story. This is the origin story of the eighth sphere, where in that religion, in the lower astral plane, in the dark realms, that's the religion of playing God.
Mhm.
That's what that is, not aligning with God within you and evolving with the cosmos, with the solar system through inner transmutation and personal responsibility. No, that religion is all about you are God and you get to create the form that you want, or you get to do it all externally. And it begins by saying, we're going to cure this devastating disease, this devastating degenerative disease, and we're going to make you walk again. And we're going to do all these incredible things. And then at the end of it, it's a bait and switch. And so humanity has to be very careful, because again, this is not our first kick at the can. This theme has been with us for thousands of years. The theme of genetic modification, hybridization, all of this stuff has been with us. Transhumanism, so.
Yeah, absolutely. We seem to have hit a real zenith in this period where they were basically like, we're taking the mask off and we're here to tell you that we're superior. You're going to do what we say, and that we make the decisions, even though we're not elected, that we're, the World Economic Forum, we're Schwab, we're Gates, and we're going to make these decisions for you. And the idea, my God, even the talk show formats, you can't really discuss anything, right? All of it takes place. The only conversation that takes place is in the alternative media. There's no real conversation left. And this is the thing that they need to do, because if people talk about it, that's the end. That's the end of the program.
Exactly. And that is why the censorship going on is becoming so much more intense, is because they're actually realizing, like, we have to start. I mean, they've ran so many trial balloons,
Yeah.
where they're trying to move the UFO conversation forward. And then honestly, a lot of the UFO community has rejected these things,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that is, so they keep kind of getting thwarted, I would say, at least in the last 10 years or
Mhm.
so, 5 years. I mean, they're still around, but it's not working out quite the same way as it should.
Blue avians, right?
Yes, Blue Avians, TTSA,
Mhm.
various different smaller operations that go on
Oh,
as
yeah.
well. And so they're trying to do it, but they don't seem to be able to really get the support and traction that they need to actually run the kind of operation that the UFO Open Disclosure will turn into, which it'll eventually turn into a religious operation. There's no way that it will just stay about technology, which is
Yes.
how it's introduced as like military on the military side, and technology, and maybe eventually some kinds of disclosures, false disclosures about various different things. But eventually it's going to turn into spirituality. There's no way that it doesn't.
Do you know who corroborates what you're saying? Former President Obama. who didn't say anything about aliens during his presidency, didn't move that public needle on it at all. But afterwards, when everyone started talking about it, suddenly he was everywhere talking about, oh, the UAPs are there and we have to call them UAP now instead of UFO. But one of the interesting things that he said was, if this turns out to be real, there's going to be a lot of new religions that get started as a result of this.
Oh, I didn't know that he said this. But absolutely.
Yeah.
Look at the New Age is full of experiencers, and aliens have become the new angels.
Yes.
This is the reality. This is the reality of modern spirituality, more and more so every day. And I think it's because at this point in time, our level of development is supposed to become a little bit more cosmic. I think we're supposed to understand our place in the solar system, in the sense of what the planets are.
Definitely.
I think that that is where we're supposed to go. But what we're getting is a very materialized and bizarre version of it. We're getting a strange version of cosmic spirituality when it's really about the individual spiritually developing and then sensing the aspects of themselves that are within Mars, developing within Jupiter, or the aspects of themselves that are connected with other worlds, or even more precisely, how the higher dimensions are represented by planetary spheres and different beings and things. These are the real lessons, which are very deep esoteric histories and things like this. But it's kind of being turned into cosmic soap operas and alien soap operas. And that's definitely not what it is.
Well, it's interesting. You've pointed this out before, that there's a kind of inversion that's taking place. And you've mentioned that they've been using high-profile psychics and mediums to now get into this UFO piece in a way that they hadn't before.
I did notice this. I did notice that the TV medium Tyler Henry had been communicating with people associated with the TTSA. And specifically on a post that he'd made about the Men in Black.
Interesting.
A very strange experience that he'd had about the Men in Black. And then I'd also noticed that he's been posting a lot of different UFO-related posts and alien-related posts, which traditionally is not part of his body of work as a traditional medium who just communicates with deceased relatives and things like that. The cosmic stuff tends to be a little bit of a different attunement. So that was really very fascinating for me to see, because it made me think that maybe there is going to be more and more attempts for various, for a three-letter agency to enter more and more into the New Age and enter more and more into spirituality. And have these cosmic psychics come forward. And using a famous one would be perfect for that. So I think the community has to look out for that, because it's much easier to, I think, do that than maybe convert. I don't know, but I'm definitely watching. My eyes are open, because I think that we're going to see. I think that we're going to see the consciousness piece pick up more, the psychic piece, the experiencer piece, consciousness. We're going to see this one become a lot bigger.
It's interesting when you have watched the campaigns kick off and you see those early trends, and you're always fantastic for having that antenna that goes out there and can really see when something is starting. That one was a weird one, because I was like, mediums and that whole piece. And then suddenly the people on the CIA side and the people who are kind of in the marketing scene of it, like Corbell and people like that, were like, oh, UFOs are just the tip of the iceberg. Actually, there's a whole consciousness transformation that goes along with this thing. So suddenly, when they weren't breaking through on the UFO side, when they weren't making that market share the way they wanted it, they needed something else. And they were like, well, maybe we'll try this out. And also, I'm a contactee. So you get 2 for 1.
It's it's an easy transition, because they've always been linked in ufology. The hardcore ufologists that are more of the researchers have always kind of begrudgingly called it the woo section,
Right. Yeah.
and then the experiencers are like, it's always been this strange thing about like the woo has always been interlinked with ufology, always, always, always.
Yes.
So the spiritual side. So it makes sense that eventually, they're going to try to milk that side of the community too, which I feel is very vulnerable.
Yes. Oh, absolutely. Well, when you think about genuine UFO phenomena, like when people have seen fleets of ships and things like that, or looked upon them and had their own consciousness shifted. There's some famous cases like that where there's been groups, in upstate New York in the 80s, this happened. And Dan Aykroyd was actually part of it, where he felt, this thing as well. What's taking place there? I'm not citing a specific one, but that's the Hudson Valley UFO. When groups of people see it, this happened over Phoenix.
Yeah.
During the Phoenix Lights in 1997. But Gigi, when you take a look at these things, now we're talking about the genuine UFO file and not CIA disclosure. What is it that's taking place there?
I think that there could be different things taking place depending on the encounter. There's the very real possibility that it's just one of ours, because we do have that technology. And we also have influencing technology. So we have the ability to influence people's emotions and people's minds, even apparently put concepts into people's minds and things like that. So we cannot rule out that this could be, quite honestly, one of our own. That's something that's always in the background for any reasonable person. But then there's also very real interactions with beings on using crafts, using plasma balls and things like this that are balls of light. There's so much incredible interdimensional phenomenon as well that is genuine interdimensional phenomenon.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
it depends on, and until humanity develops spiritually enough to feel in their body what is synthetic and what is organic.
Right. You have to be able to tell those two apart. I guess it's the same thing when receiving impressions, if you're getting it from a good source or a negative source, when it comes to psychic research. When you look at this whole period that we've been in since they started to announce the UFO piece in 1947, they just had the 75th anniversary at the CIA for their role in this. They were founded in part due to this. But we had the 75th anniversary of the Roswell case, the 75th anniversary of Kenneth Arnold chasing the flying saucers. Where are we now, 75 years into it, where it's so heavily manipulated in the last 5 years? Can we ever get ourselves clear from the soup of disinformation they've been pushing?
I think we will. I do think that we will. But this has always been what is so strange to me, is like it is a phenomenon that has been at least publicly 75 years old. So why are we discussing some of the things that have already been discussed? So for example, with the Gary Nolan piece that we've been talking about today, it's giving off the impression to the public that people who have had radiation poisoning from UFOs have never been studied before.
Right.
I don't believe that.
It's all new, don't you know, Gigi?
It's all new. It's like these are things that you've been studying. We know that there's recovered craft. You take one little peek into the ufology community with so many credible whistleblowers, and we know that there's recovered craft. We know that there's strange technologies. And I'm supposed to believe that this individual is just finally studying what these crafts do to people's bodies.
Yes.
I mean,
and this is amazing because they ran this story in the major media about how Dr. Nolan was studying the brains of individuals who had come into contact with ETs and figured out there was something special about these brains. And by the way, since he's one himself, I guess he's one of the special ones also.
Don't forget that piece. Yeah. Of course.
But it is weird. I mean, they are pretending. Roger Lear, for years, this doctor studied implants. Whitley Strieber brought up implants in communion, said he was walking, or still walks around with one to this day.
Right. It's been a staple in the experiencer community. Even the effect of various different technologies on the human body. I mean, the Nazis were doing that with prison camp people.
Yes.
Allegedly.
Yeah.
And experimenting like strange technologies that we would consider allegedly they were doing that then, and that's in the 40s. So it's just this whole thing that this group does where they have secretly researched this stuff for decades. And then they bring it forward like, hey, there's this cool thing that we found. And it's like, no, let's get real.
Right.
We've been studying this for decades. There's a whole lot of evidence for that, like so much. And you're bringing it forward now because you have an agenda.
Right.
So that's the only way that I can view that, because that's just not realistic. And it's only going to work on people who are not aware of, some of the material in the alternative field.
Gigi, absolutely fascinating. Now the conversation continues at darkjournalist.com. Be sure to subscribe and get the best episodes delivered right in your inbox. All of Gigi's work can be found at gigiyoung.com, along with her Mars Mystery series at her YouTube channel, Gigi Young. Join us on Friday nights at 8 p.m. for the X series. See you soon.